Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I love that tune composed by Simon Mogul of the New School. I'm Rebecca Friedman, the director of the Wolfsonian Public Humanities Lab here at FIU, and I'm so proud to welcome you to our new season of Coffee and Conversations, telling community stories. Although we're now in our fourth season, we started this series at the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic as a way of strengthening community ties and supporting the great work being done at our many community partners. We've explored topics from how the pandemic has shifted and affected museums and cultural institutions, the histories of anti-Blackness in museum spaces and beyond, and explored new works in literature with Miami Book Fair. Now, with this season, telling community stories, we're highlighting the incredible work of our 8 trusted community partners with whom we are embarking on a new journey as part of a new major grant generously funded by the Mellon Foundation. For this grant, we are working with these incredible institutions based in South Florida to digitize aspects of their existing collections, create new archives through new oral history projects, and preserve community stories for generations to come. To introduce our first guest today, allow me to welcome my dear friend and amazing colleague, Julio Capo Jr., the Deputy Director of the Wolfsonian Public Humanities Lab.
Thank you. It's exciting to be back. So briefly, our format is simple and it lasts no more than 30 minutes. We'll ask our guest a few questions, and for roughly the last 10 minutes or so of the segment, we'll take a few questions from the audience. And at any time during this live webinar, please submit a question. You can find that button below on your screen. Today, I have the great honor and pleasure to be in conversation with Hunter Ohanian, the Executive Director of the Stonewall National Museum and Archives in Fort Lauderdale. Stonewall has been a home to me as a researcher, as an intern, as a museum goer, and so much more for over 15 years. And I know that I'm not alone. It means so much to our community. It's a staple. Welcome, Hunter.
Hello, Julio, and hello, Rebecca. Nice to see both of you, as well as everybody else. It's great to spend some time with all of you here today.
Likewise. It's exciting to be back. So if we could just start with the kind of easy question, right? It's not really that easy. Tell us a bit about Stonewall. Can you best describe the work you do there?
Sure. Well, Stonewall's been around for 47 years, and for those of you who might be aware, maybe a little bit confused, the word Stonewall comes as a result of an incident that happened in New York City in 1969. And there were a group of individuals, mostly gay, trans, and sort of working class folks, who basically were fed up to here with police intervention. And at that time in 1969, there was just the nascent parts of the gay rights movement, but it was still illegal for gays and lesbians to congregate in a bar. It was actually illegal in 49 states at that time for sexual practices between members of the same sex. So things happened, of course, but it was always under the possibility that the police could come in and raid, and that things would, you would be interfered with. So anyway, it was a great event. And if you don't know anything about Stonewall, the Stonewall uprising in 1969, it just celebrated its 50th anniversary, and just Google it or go to our website, stonewall-museum.org, and you can find out about a lot of the history. Now, what about us in the Stonewall National Museum and Archive? Do we have all the stuff from the Stonewall Inn in 1969? No. We actually have no connection whatsoever with the inn or the events that happened that evening, except one big thing. The word Stonewall ended up becoming a name for gay civil rights. It became synonymous with that. And the way I always like to think about this is think about Barack Obama's second inaugural speech 4 or 5 years ago, where when he was talking about civil rights, he said, from Selma to Seneca Falls to Stonewall. Those words have become synonymous with women's rights, with racial rights, and with gay rights. So we were started actually by a young man by the name of Mark Silver, he was about 18, 19 years old. He was openly gay. It was 1973, living here in Hollywood, Florida. And his parents were very supportive, and he just started buying gay books. He believed that there was something important about amassing information about himself and his identity. And again, we're talking 1973. We're talking Richard Nixon being in the White House at the time. The Vietnam War still going on. But certainly there was a lot of cultural change happening at the same time. So here he is in Hollywood, Florida, and he has a bookshelf. And so he starts buying these books and putting them on the bookshelf. And so it grew up until 1981, this personal collection. And today, now we are a 501c3 nonprofit library with 28,000 volumes. And it just goes to show that you can have an idea and it can expand and grow. Now, nobody keeps statistics of these things, but it is believed that we are the largest LGBTQ library in the world, if not in the solar system. Beyond the solar system, I'm not quite sure how many other gay libraries are out there, but we can get out and find it. The other thing is, over the years, the organization has been collecting papers. And those papers are really important because what they do is they show more than just the books themselves. They show what it is that we actually did. And so their papers, their serials, their meeting notes. Primarily, we go back to the 1950s, which is really the early days of the gay liberation movement. Things like Daughters of Bilitis and Mattachine and One Archives. Those things came out at the end of the Second World War. There's a lot to be said about the Lavender Scare and McCarthyism and all that stuff and how things changed. But so our archives are actually papers and objects that deal from that period from the early 1950s to the present day. So there's about 70 years of history. Those, as I said, there were 28 volumes in our library. Libraries get measured and judged by the number of books. Archives get measured and judged by the number of linear feet. So we have 2,700 linear feet of archival material. Now, to give you an idea of what that means, you would have to go all the way up to the top of the Empire State Building and then all the way down, and you wouldn't even hit 2,700 feet. It totals more than 6 million pages of materials. And so their serials, their publications, their personal papers, their a whole box on Judy Garland, their Ellen DeGeneres' running shoes. There's, you name it. It's the entire gamut. It's everything that happened in Miami-Dade and Broward County about civil rights. And so we hang on to this stuff because, number one, we want to make sure it's available for researchers and writers and scholars and artists to be able to interpret it. But also it means that those members of the gay community have evidence and proof that we existed and there was a fight and there was a path and there was a journey. Without an archive, there is no evidence that something had happened. And so for historians and for those of us who are just curious, the idea to go to places like this, to be able to see this history is really sort of one of the most profound things that we as a civilized culture and society do. So sorry for such a long answer, Julio, but it's sort of like where we are today.
No, I want to hear this forever. It's I have to say that so much of this resonates because, when I was younger coming out, for instance, these spaces are so critical, right? I mean, to see yourself, to read material that was written with similar experiences and these kind of same affects, it was transformative for me. And I know that's true, when I would go to the library voraciously looking for representation of what it meant to be a queer Latino man, or just a queer, like, what did that look like in a space? Like, it's difficult to find even today in just the general library, and that these spaces are validating and homes for so many people. And that's transformative for all of us. If I could just push you a little bit to talk a little bit more, I was so fascinated by the Stonewall story, even the kind of naming of it, right? So can you clarify, is it local? Are the collections mostly local, or does it kind of focus on the South? Or, obviously some of the examples you gave are of national significance. So, I mean, what does that look like for people who just want to do research?
All of the above. So again, we started here in South Florida, and our holdings are very deep about gay history in South Florida. So there is no serial or periodical or event that's happened in the last 70 years that we don't have a deep bench on. But as a result of our growth over the years, and our hats go off to those women and men and trans folks over the years who kept on contributing things, and they just kept on bringing it in, bringing it in. And the 6 million pages that we represent the entire country. So we have complete runs of, of the Advocate, of the Bay Area Reporter, of, every possible national or important regional publications. And in addition, we have had a focus on the southeastern United States. And we consider that geographic focus, even though we're not limited by it. But over the years, it's really been things east of Houston and south of Washington, D.C. And so it's that chunk. One of the reasons why our focus is so big there is in the early 1980s, I would say like 76, 77, while Mark Silber was doing the same thing in his bookcase, there was an individual in Boca by the name of Joel Starkey. And he started a newspaper, which he mimeographed. It was like letter-set type, and he would just type out things and put these stories. And it was a several-page newspaper. And he would just write stories and find things in newspapers about gay news. And he was so industrious that he wrote to every gay publication he could find back in the 1970s. And he said, if I send you a copy of my publication for free, will you send me yours? And he did, and they did. And when he passed away about 10 years ago, his entire trove of all of these collections of early LGBTQ publications came and formed a major part of our archive. So we have them from all over the American South. We have them, and we get asked all the time for some of these early publications because we're the only known repository of those to exist. And what's great when you read them is I was looking at one recently from Birmingham in 1972, and it's a little kind of a gay bar rag about where to go, what to do. But there was, there are a few news stories in there, but there was a news story in there about this big about telling gay men not to go to a particular park and cruise to meet other men because 2 men were there the week before and they witnessed a lynching going on. It may actually be the only historic record of that actual lynching that was happening. And so the value that is in these documents that people feel, what are they? It's just a bunch of gay stuff. Well, no, that's not quite true. It represents American culture and actually has so many other historical tales to tell at the same time.
That's so powerful to hear. Go ahead, Rebecca. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, just quickly to interject. I wonder, Hunter, if I think I know the answer, but let me ask it this way, whether or not there's any impulse to collect materials that are more global in nature. My own area is Russian and Soviet history. And I just remember when that wall fell, there was so much going on in the LGBTQ community there. And I don't know this for a fact, but I imagine that there exists no place to put anything in those contexts. So I just wonder if future ambition, it's something you all would think about or consider. Powerful.
Yes, we definitely would. And I think that's a great question. And of course, with all of us who maintain collections, intentionality is very important. And so how you want to shape a collection plan, how you want to shape your collection going forward, and particularly be thinking about those constituencies and communities out there that might not have a natural home that those papers could go to. At Stonewall, we have been a very small nonprofit and a very mighty one, but for many, many years, we were really run by volunteers. And also, I'll say that a lot of the holdings that we have were really that we do have are things that came in over the transom, meaning that individuals here in South Florida donated them to us. That's all great. But the problem is, particularly in an organization like this, again, it's no fault, but when you have a lot of white men collecting things and you don't intentionally try to make the collection, to move it to be more diverse, whether that's gender, race, or internationally, you're sort of left with what there is. As I said, for example, we're very fortunate to have all those Joel Starkey documents. And that was, and also FYI, he's an amazing character. We're going to be doing an exhibition about him this summer. But in addition to being a publisher, he was the first male board member of the national organization. He was a socialist, and he was also a huge communicator with gay men in Florida prisons. And so we have all of this correspondence with him. So here he is, a communicant, he's a publisher, he is a socialist, he's a feminist. And so it's this incredibly rich story. But again, when we think about other things, and now we're really looking at our collection with a critical eye about, well, where were the people of color in the 1970s and 80s, and how were they represented through our papers? And that's where, to go back to gays in Germany or in Russia or other parts of the United States, it's really important to think about how we bring those things together.
There's so much rich stuff here that I think I want to unpack a little bit. One of the great things about, I feel like I said this already, but I just, as one of those interns who did like, catalog some of this, what Hunter says can't be over. I mean, when you put it that way with the Empire State Building, it's massive. And what you said here about the witness of anti-Black violence, for example, in that is LGBTQ history is American history, and that these kinds of spaces, right, give us so much about it. These are intersecting histories, and this is the kind of material, right, that Stonewall holds. And then to follow up on this last thing, right, despite that, there's still a process of decolonizing the archives, very much aware of what, why certain materials were kept and why others weren't, how these stories were told. And I wonder if then we can talk a little bit about the process of oral histories, like how you envision, oral histories as helping to decolonize, the archives themselves, providing us new stories and new perspectives that aren't new, right? They're just, we're preserving them for the first time, or, for one of the first times.
Well, it's a really important piece. And of course, the oral history piece is something that we're very happy to be working with Wolfsonian in. And as you guys know, and some people know, we also received another grant from the Mellon Foundation to allow us to begin, thank you, to do more digitization here. And so right now, what we're doing with our collection is, and this is specifically around the area of oral histories, is we're beginning to prioritize what we have, and we are specifically looking now in the collection for old audio cassette tapes and VHS tapes, 8mm reel-to-reel films, and any kind of time-based media, because all of that work needs to be, it's been generally cataloged, but now it needs to be identified what really is on the tape, what is really on that VHS, and then moving that to the next point so that the oral histories are actually kept. I think that for all of us, just like the three of us and anybody else here joining us, it's really interesting to tell these stories and to talk about these things and to be able to do it. Writing is a wonderful thing. I love writing. I'm a good writer, but it's also nice to tell these stories as well too. And storytelling is a major part. So yes, it's incumbent upon all of us to collect oral histories and to be able to preserve those. I mean, one of the things that I'm interested in, I'm looking for and can't find, when I look at the bar rags from South Florida and Miami and the 1970s and 80s, there is a prevalence of white men in those. But then you look at some of the ads in those, and you see there were transvestites and drag queens performing, and at least a third or 40% of them are people of color. Now, I want to know, what was that community like? What was that community of drag performers moving from Miami to Tampa to Orlando to Fort Lauderdale? You know, they weren't traveling alone. You know, there was a community there. We need to hear those stories and get those stories written or recorded.
So powerful. It's exciting too. So I want to ask the big question about, coronavirus, I guess, right? But just kind of everything that's compounded with this last year that has been difficult for so many institutions. How can our audiences best support Stonewall and the great work that's being done there? What's the best way to do something like that at this moment?
Well, we're running a bit of a fool's game here. We actually run a private independent library and archive. And there are not a lot of those left in the United States. So most libraries and archives are either attached to governments, either county or state governments or city governments, or to educational institutions. So for organizations like this, the number one thing they always need are resources or financial resources and support. And we're very fortunate. We are in a 4,600 square foot facility here on East Sunrise in Fort Lauderdale. And Broward County has been very generous. Our rent and our overhead is very, very affordable here. And so that's great. But I think with everything else going on, what we really need is engagement. We need donations to our archive and our library. We need ideas about the people who we should be speaking to, about how we can add to the richness of what we have here. When COVID started, we started doing a lot of online programming, just like this. And Julio, thank you. You were one of the first ones I roped into our series. And there now, I just saw a number the other day that there have been over 12,000 people have seen our virtual series here. So I think for anybody, it's really about advice. It's about expertise. It's about being able to add some value to a small nonprofit with amazing and huge holdings.
That's great. Thank you so much. So at any point, if anyone has a question, please feel free to drop it off in the bottom here. Rebecca, I know you have a question.
I do have a question. It's a little bit of a self-serving question because it highlights the grant project that we're doing with you and with 7 other partners. One of our goals at the Public Humanities Lab is to create kind of networks among community partners. We've all met, all 8 partners have met, and we'll meet a number of other times. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about 2 things. One, your kind of local networks with other cultural institutions, museums, libraries, and so forth, and maybe more specifically how this project in particular might help deepen those connections or broaden those. Assuming it will.
Yes, no, it will. And as we were talking earlier, it already has. Like both of you, I'm a strong believer in power with the power and strength in numbers that could go forward, and so I think that's really important. I'm fortunate that from my seat here at Stonewall, I get to sit in a bunch of different tables. So, for example, I'm involved and close to other LGBTQ organizations here in South Florida, Ultimate Manners, and Miami. I'm also very happy, though, that I have a seat at the table with the heads of other museums in Fort Lauderdale as well, too. And so that's very important. And then I'm also very happy that we serve on a group network, and it's very informal. But it's been quite good. There have been more than 50 people showing up each time. But it's a national network of LGBTQ archives from around the United States. So we meet every 2 months on a Zoom call, and you have institutional ones, the Gerber Hart and the One Archive. We have people in Anchorage. We have the Lesbian History Archive. We have the Transgender Project. And so we all meet together. It's a collective in the old sense. We don't have any real infrastructure, but we look at the issues that are common to all of us and the problems, and then we collectively try to figure out how we solve those things. And that is like an amazing process to be part of. Now there's a 4th one that we're going to be involved in, which is through the Wolfsonian project, which is just terrific. And so it was great to meet all of my partners there when we had a Zoom meeting last week. And right now, for example, we're looking for guest curators, but BIPOC guest curators. And I sent something out to the group last night or the day before, and we've gotten a number of great responses back for that. So as I said, it's a tough game to run some of these small nonprofits, but to the extent that we can become partners with big institutions and with each other and share our resources. One of the things that we've talked about, which I'm excited about, is the idea that by creating these connections, people can be learning about what it is that they want to be doing with their particular organization, particularly with something around digitization, which is not, it's new to some people. And so there are things that there's technology involved, and there are procedures involved. And so people need to share that information as they go forward. Because why are we doing it? Two reasons. We're doing it to preserve the assets that we actually have, because literally, despite how good our conditions are, a piece of paper of newsprint that was made 70 years ago, it is going to disintegrate. So we have to digitize these things because the objects themselves are not going to last forever. And then number two, the digitization of them allows for a much broader audience to see them. And we've already begun the process of identifying existing digital repositories of a lot of the serials that we have in our collection. We're posting those now on our website, and people can find those. And then as we go through this year into next year, people will be seeing a lot more digital assets available. But the community, seeing the other partners here, is really an important thing for us to be doing.
So interesting, Hunter. I'm just thinking about the power of all those networks, but in particular, the power of the network of all of the LGBTQ collections across the country, because in a way, if it's truly a collective, and I'm sure there are stories there, but if it's truly a collective, the ways in which you all together are kind of building a narrative, creating a narrative, making all those incredibly important decisions about archives, what stays, what goes, what does it mean, how is knowledge generated? I mean, that work is so important and will reverberate forevermore. As you all work together, especially across the country. I can't help but wish, and maybe it exists outside of the US, that this stuff is going on too.
Yeah, and again, we're wide open to that. I mean,
yeah,
certainly,
love the idea.
there is. Yeah.
What I love so much about all of this too is that it kind of looks back to and is inspired by LGBTQ history in and of itself. Whether it was some of the organizations of the homophile movement, like the Daughters of Bilitis or the Mattachine, or the Gay Liberation Front or ACT UP, that all these chapters are created, but also there's a kind of national network of knowledge that's known and shared, and that's now we see it in a public history way, in a way that's really transformative for the sharing of this knowledge, that it keeps growing and is inspired by the past in which it's founded. Does that make sense? Or at least...
Yeah, it's so true. And also, I just want to throw another point out there, which all of these connections make as well too, in the sense that, I've been doing this for a while, and what I find interesting is that, well, I'll go back and give you a story. I was the director of the Leslie Lohman Museum of Gay and Lesbian Art in New York, and got it accredited. And when I was director there, it was at the time that the Supreme Court made the decision to legalize gay marriage. And I would often leave my office and walk through the galleries, and when I would see the visitors in the gallery, I would stop and say hello to them and sort of chat with them. And but usually what I would see during the day would be maybe young people coming out of school, coming to an exhibition, or gay people. But there was one afternoon that I walked in, and there was this sort of very typical Upper West Side in their 60s, straight appearing married couple. And they were just going through, I forget what exhibition it was, but they were going through the exhibition. And I said, "Oh, hello, welcome. Is this your first time here?" And they looked at each other and they said, "Well, yes, it is." And I said, "Oh, so what brings you here today?" And this was the day after the Supreme Court had rendered the same-sex marriage. And their response was, the husband responded, "Well, it looks like this gay thing is going to take off." And
I mean,
and I love that, because we all sit in our little holes. The Studio Museum of Harlem is open to all of us. The Jewish Museum is open to all of us. Stonewall is open to everybody. It's really for those who really care about American culture, from 1950 to the present day. This is not just about gay people. And even though it's our particular niche, and it's an area that we serve, and it's an area that we develop and work on, this is really anybody who's interested in culture and history. And so as we move through intersectionality, as we move through acceptance, I think all of us have to think about how we can look at these resources in a different way, that they're not just for the people who they're designed, I guess, designed in some way about in the beginning, but they're really interesting to all of us.
I think that's a really perfect way of wrapping us up, Hunter. Please go and support Stonewall. Check them out on social media, check out their website. This is stonewall-museum.org. Check out all their exhibitions, all the events coming up. So many of these are virtual and safe. Donate your time, your money, any resources available. Check them out. They're doing incredibly important work. Thank you so much, Hunter, as always, for all you do.
Thank you. And thank you again, Julio and Rebecca, for all the work that you guys are doing on this. And so thank you. And thank all of you for being here, and feel free to reach out to us at any time. So long.
Thank you all. And please join us at the same time, same place, well, at least the same link, for next week's episode of Coffee and Conversations, where Julio and I will be in conversation with our friends at the historic Hampton House. It's one you don't want to miss. So we'll see you then. Thanks again, Hunter.
Thanks,
Take care.
Hunter.
Bye.